What if the very silence you're conditioned to fear is the one thing that can restore everything she is dismantling? When a woman begins to create emotional distance, every instinct society has taught you screams, act now, fix it, call her, text incessantly, write a heartfelt apology, prove to her how indispensable she is to you. You rush to bridge that growing chasm, believing that the right sequence of words or a grand display of affection will coax her back. But here is the difficult truth. No words you can muster right now will penetrate her heart as profoundly as your silence will. This silence is not an act of rejection. It is not a passive surrender. It is the most potent statement a man can make, not to her, but to himself. It is a declaration that says, my identity is intact, even without your constant affirmation. Stay with me, because what I am about to guide you through will reveal how silence, when wielded with calm conviction, becomes your ultimate source of strength. This is the fundamental mindset shift that separates the men who dissolve in the face of rejection from those who alchemize it into personal power. If you are committed to becoming that man, supporting this channel enables us to bring this clarity and emotional fortitude to every man who is silently hurting. Your presence here is not an accident. Let us begin. When a woman starts to withdraw, when her warmth cools to indifference, her replies become clipped and infrequent, and her presence feels more like a ghost in the room, most men stumble into the trap of reaction. It's a primal, almost biological response. A panic sets in, not just from her quietness, but from the specter of what it signifies: disconnection, rejection, or the ultimate fear replacement. And so, they react. They escalate their efforts, double texting, composing long, emotionally laden paragraphs, demanding to know what's wrong, pleading for a return to normalcy. They flood her world with the desperate, frantic energy of a man terrified of being erased from her life. They operate under the flawed assumption that more input will yield a better outcome, that if they can just demonstrate the depth of their care, she will awaken from her emotional slumber and return to them. What they fail to grasp, to their own detriment, is that each of these well-intentioned gestures often shoves her further away. When a man attempts to repair emotional distance with an effort she never requested, he inadvertently validates a suspicion growing within her, that his sense of self is more dependent on her than it is respected by him, and nothing attraction faster than neediness. In this context, effort is not perceived as romantic, it is perceived as insecurity. It communicates dependency. It reveals a man whose self-worth is precariously balanced on the foundation of her warm responses. The moment a woman senses that her emotional availability is the pillar holding up his emotional stability, she loses something crucial: admiration. She no longer sees a grounded, self-assured man who is the author of his own value. She sees someone emotionally contingent on her every move, and desire cannot survive in that environment. It suffocates under the weight of constant reassurance seeking. True respect for oneself begins with restraint. The capacity to remain still when every fiber of your being wants to charge forward is the hallmark of a man who knows his worth. Is non-negotiable. It signals maturity, emotional intelligence, and above all, it proves that your center of gravity, your inner peace, is not a prize that someone else can award or confiscate. When you elect not to chase her emotionally, when you resist the urge to justify your existence or beg for her validation, you fundamentally alter the energetic current between you. You cease communicating from a position of lack and begin operating from a position of inherent power. In doing so, you grant her something essential that most men deny a woman when she pulls away: space. That space is transformative, not because it is a manipulative tactic, but because it serves as a system reset. It allows her to confront her own silence, to feel the weight of your absence rather than being perpetually bombarded by your presence. It shatters the predictable cycle where she withdraws and you advance. When that pattern is broken, a rare phenomenon occurs. She is forced to reflect. She begins to experience the gravity of your stillness, not the cold, vindictive stillness of pettiness, but the calm, rooted stillness of a man who declares, I will not run after anyone. I stand firmly with myself. In that moment, attraction is given the oxygen it needs to breathe again, because what women are often subconsciously testing isn't whether you will give chase, but whether you can lead without demanding control. It's a test of whether your emotional constitution is solid enough to handle the fluctuations of hers. That is where respect is resurrected. That is where desire is reborn. And it all commences not by doing more, but by deliberately doing less, by holding your ground, by respecting yourself more than you fear losing her. When you master this, you stop reacting and start becoming the man she would never want to leave. Silence is frequently misinterpreted by those who have never learned to harness its true potential. Too many it equates to weakness, to surrender, to a passive acceptance of defeat in the face of emotional distance. But in reality, silence, when employed with deliberate purpose, is the most powerful form of communication a man can possess. This is not the cold, manipulative silence intended to punish or play mind games. It is not the weaponized quiet of someone seeking to inflict guilt. It is not emotional avoidance. It is an entirely different beast. Silence, when practiced with strength and self-awareness, is restraint in its most elevated form. It is the conscious choice not to fill the void, simply to alleviate your own discomfort. It is the decision not to chase merely to quiet your own anxiety. It is an internal resolve to remain still, even when your heart is pounding, ready to sprint. In this context, silence does not signify absence. It signifies presence in its most unadulterated state. It is the quiet confidence of a man who feels no need to articulate his value, who doesn't disintegrate when communication dwindles, who understands that his true definition lies not in the volume of his reactions, but in the depth of his centeredness. This caliber of silence has a gravitational pull. It doesn't shout, yet it is profoundly heard. It doesn't plead for attention, yet it is impossible to ignore. It creates an interruption in the emotional rhythm she has come to expect. When she withdraws and you do not follow, when she ceases to reach out and you do not rush to fill the gap, that unexpected disruption becomes the most resounding message of all. You are not doing nothing. You are doing something incredibly deliberate. You are refusing to abdicate your power for the sake of temporary reassurance. You are stepping back not from a place of defeat, but from a place of discipline. This silence doesn't construct walls. It constructs curiosity. She begins to register the change not just in your behavior, but in the very energy you project. That recognition marks the beginning of an emotional recalibration. It is the instant she transitions from feeling pursued to feeling uncertain, and within that uncertainty, something vital happens. Her focus returns to you, not because you demanded it, but because you cut off the supply of attention she had begun to take for granted. You are no longer reacting. You have become a mystery. And in the landscape of a relationship, mystery is magnetism, while predictability is emotional death. When you are perpetually available, always replying, constantly explaining, there is no tension, no polarity. But when you become still, when you allow the silence to breathe, she starts asking questions not just about you, but about herself. Why isn't he checking on me? Why isn't he asking what's wrong? Why does he seem so composed, so unaffected, so gone? These are not accusations forming in her mind. They are awakenings. The very silence she might have initially interpreted as disinterest now begins to occupy her thoughts, tugging at feelings she believed were settled. This isn't about playing hard to get. It's about being hard to shake. It's about anchoring yourself so deeply in your own self-worth that you no longer need to chase closeness from anyone. That internal depth becomes attractive in ways that cannot be faked, because she isn't responding to a tactic. She is responding to your energy. And when your energy communicates, I am complete, with or without you, it introduces an emotional tension that reignites curiosity. Curiosity blossoms into interest, and interest leads to re-engagement. Silence, then, is not merely the absence of sound. It is presence infused with depth. It is the invisible force that rebalances the connection without forcing a single move. It allows both of you to reflect instead of react, to think instead of defend. And most importantly, it gives her the rarest of experiences in our noisy world, a chance to actually miss you. And when someone begins to miss you, they begin to question why. They start to realize what your presence once provided. They begin to remember your calm, your reliability, your unwavering self-mastery. That memory doesn't diminish. It grows magnified by the contrast of the quiet. It all begins because you chose not to speak, not from a place of fear, but from a place of power. Because silence, wielded with composure and confidence, isn't emptiness. It is your most powerful statement. A woman may hear your words, but she responds to your energy. You can articulate the most perfect sentiments, compose a flawless message, offer the most heartfelt reassurance, but if the energy behind it is frantic, if it is born from fear, if it feels less like presence and more like pressure, she will feel it and she will retreat. Not because she is cruel or unfeeling, but because, on a primal level, she does not feel safe in the presence of that energy. Women are intuitively attuned to emotional currents. They aren't just reacting to what you say, but to the emotional subtext beneath your words. When that subtext is turbulent, driven by anxiety, insecurity, or a fear of loss, it creates an emotional weight that repels rather than attracts. Now contrast that with the shift that occurs when you move from pressure to presence. Pressure is the energy that says, I need a response from you so that I can feel secure. Presence is the energy that says, I am here, grounded and whole, whether you respond or not. The difference may seem subtle, but emotionally, it is seismic. Presence doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't fidget or desperately scan for approval. It simply is. And that state of being, that emotional stillness, is the essence of what is often called masculine energy. At its highest expression, masculine energy is not loud, aggressive, or performative. It is calm and unshaken. It moves with purpose, not panic. It leads not through control, but through consistency. This form of energy is a rarity today because most men were never taught how to cultivate and hold it. They were taught to impress, to persuade, to be constantly available. But authentic masculine presence isn't about perpetual accessibility. It's about being deeply anchored in your values, in your mission, and in your capacity to remain still in a world that clamors for your attention. When a woman senses that you are this type of man, the entire dynamic between you is transformed. When she creates distance, most men lean in harder. But when you don't, when you remain emotionally composed, when you refrain from pressing, questioning, or reacting with frustration, she feels the difference. She notices the stark contrast between your calm and the chaos of others she may have known. She experiences your energy not as an imposition, but as a foundation. And that foundation becomes something scarce and comforting, not because you're providing her with constant emotional servicing, but because you aren't trying to extract anything from her to stabilize yourself. This kind of presence is powerful because it compels her to question her own distance. It interrupts the predictable script she may have been expecting. She anticipated you would chase, question her silence, and attempt to win her back with grand gestures or emotional appeals. Instead, you gave her space, and within that space, you gave her something more valuable than anything you could have said. The experience of a man who is not governed by her moods, her distance, or her approval. In her world, that kind of man is an anomaly. The beauty of presence without pressure is that its effect is not limited to her. It transforms you as you practice it. You cease outsourcing your emotional state. You begin to grasp that peace is not found in someone else's reply. It is found in your ability to respond to yourself, to hold yourself steady even when someone you care about is pulling away. That inner steadiness becomes manifest. It appears in your tone, your timing, your posture, and your priorities. That visibility becomes attraction, not just physical, but emotional and spiritual attraction. You begin to represent something more than just a partner. You represent security. And here's the secret. Few men are told, a woman does not want to be the source of your stability. She wants to take refuge in it. She wants to feel that she can bring her emotions, her fears, and her complexities into your world without overwhelming you. She doesn't want to lead the emotional dance. She wants to be led by someone who can maintain the rhythm, even when the music changes. When you are that man, you stop chasing reassurance and start radiating calm. You stop trying to prove your worth and start embodying it. You stop asking what went wrong and start building a life so robust and full that anyone who chooses to leave it knows precisely what they are abandoning. And the most surprising part, the part no one tells you, is that this kind of presence outlasts absence long after you've said nothing, long after the last message was left on read. Your emotional clarity continues to echo in her mind, not because you forced her to see it, but because you allowed your silence to speak. And the message it delivers is this: I am still here, but I am no longer waiting for you to see me. That is the essence of presence without pressure. It is emotional sovereignty. It is dignified restraint. It is the quiet strength that keeps a woman thinking, questioning, and, if she is truly aligned, reaching back toward a man who never ceased being himself, even when she ceased being sure. Silence is not an excuse to do nothing. It is the exact opposite. It is an invitation to build a call to action, not articulated in words, but in movement. It is not a passive state. It is a sacred one. It is the protected space where true transformation occurs, not for her, but for you. The moment you stop expending your energy chasing someone else's validation, that energy flows back to you. In that moment, you are confronted with a profound question: who will you become now that your focus is no longer consumed with trying to win someone back? This is the critical juncture where most men falter. They interpret going silent as waiting for her to notice, waiting for her to reach out, waiting for things to revert to the way they were. But waiting is not building. Waiting is a passive condition, rooted in a hope that lacks action, and hope without movement is merely fantasy. But when you recognize the opportunity embedded within the silence, something remarkable happens. You begin to build. You begin to reclaim the fragments of yourself that were misplaced when you made another person the epicenter of your universe. Because the stark truth is that most men relinquish their power not when they fall in love, but when they forget themselves in the process. They neglect the gym. They shelve their ambitious dreams. They shrink their entire world to the size of one person. When that person steps away, they discover their foundation was built on something terrifyingly fragile. But now that the noise has subsided, now that the texts have ceased, now that the phone calls are not coming, you have been granted the greatest gift in disguise: space. And in that space you have a choice. You can spiral into desperation, or you can use it to ascend. So, use it. Use every second of that silence to sharpen your being. Go to the gym, not out of spite or to make her jealous, but to forge the physical strength you were always meant to possess. Read, not to kill time, but to upgrade the software of your mind. Learn a new skill, launch that side project, recommit to your life's mission, rewrite your vision for the future. Surround yourself with people who don't just comfort you, but challenge you to elevate. Because now, you are not just rebuilding, you are redefining. You are becoming the man she never fully witnessed, the man she couldn't completely appreciate, the man whose growth was still in progress. You are no longer the version of yourself who outsourced his self-worth to someone else's approval. You are now becoming the version who doesn't beg for love but inspires it, who doesn't chase respect but commands it. And all of this transpires quietly, not in dramatic social media posts, not in "watch me level up" captions, not in overt displays of pain or revenge. It happens in the early morning hours, in the sweat and the discipline, in the pages turned and the miles run in the hallowed silence of your own grind. It is during this process that something deeper begins to shift, not just in her perception of you, but in your perception of yourself. You start to realize that the real tragedy was not her walking away. The real tragedy would have been you remaining the same just to convince her to stay. Now, as you build in the silence, you are not doing it with the primary goal of her return. You are doing it so that you never, ever shrink yourself for the sake of love again. You are becoming a man of vision, a man with boundaries, a man who is selective not out of arrogance, but out of a profound alignment with his own values. You now understand that not everyone is worthy of access to the version of you that is currently rising. Not everyone gets a front row seat to this rebirth. And if she does come back, if the silence piques her curiosity and she returns to see who you have become, she will encounter a man who didn't just endure the silence, but thrived in it. She will see someone stronger, wiser, and more grounded. A man who is capable of loving with his whole heart, but never at the expense of his own soul. This is your opportunity to stop proving and start becoming. To stop chasing and start attracting. You achieve this not through force, not through words, and not through grand declarations, but through consistent, quiet evolution. The kind of evolution that doesn't need to be seen but simply cannot be ignored. So, don't just go silent. Build in the silence. Let your actions whisper more loudly than your pain ever could. Let your growth do all the talking, and by the time anyone realizes what transpired in the space you once used to chase, they will be witnessing the arrival of a man who used the silence not to fall apart, but to become unforgettable. At first, she might not register it consciously. It begins as a subtle, almost imperceptible change, a shift, not in your words, but in their conspicuous absence, not in your actions, but in the void where your energy once instinctively reached for hers. She glances at her phone, at the screen where your name used to appear, and sees nothing. The days tick by, and a question begins to form, not necessarily because she craves your attention, but because the established rhythm has been broken. The pattern is shattered. Where there was once the dependable, predictable comfort of your pursuit, your concern, your validation, there is now quiet, not an angry, shouting silence, but a still one. A silence so centered and self-contained that it startles her, because until this point she knew, with near certainty, how you would respond. She knew that if she pulled back, you would step forward. If she went cold, you would try to warm things up. If she left a void, you would rush to fill it. But now, the dynamic is inverted, and this reversal begins to unsettle her. Not in a threatening manner, but in a way that demands her attention. She starts to feel the shift not just in your silence, but in the very quality of your energy. It is no longer reaching for her. It is no longer orbiting her. It is focused elsewhere on something she cannot see, cannot touch, and is not a part of. That something is you, your growth, your path, your quiet reconstruction. The emotional self-control you have cultivated begins to transmit a message, without a single word. I am no longer available for the version of this connection that required me to chase. I am no longer pouring my energy into uncertainty. And because she is emotionally intuitive, she doesn't need to be told this directly. She senses it. She feels it. This new version of you is unfamiliar, and the unfamiliar is fascinating. You used to be predictable, emotionally available at the slightest tug of a string. Now, she is uncertain of what you're thinking. She doesn't know where your heart lies. And the human mind, especially within the context of relationships, abhors uncertainty. But attraction does not flourish in certainty. It flourishes in curiosity, and that curiosity begins to mount. Why isn't he reacting? Why hasn't he reached out? Has he moved on? She may not voice these questions. She might even actively suppress them, but they are there, quietly echoing in the back of her mind. This is not the result of manipulation. It is not about making her chase you. It is about reclaiming your rightful place in the dynamic, not above her, not beneath her, but standing on your own solid ground. You are no longer chasing her emotions, like a kite buffeted by the wind. You are the grounded anchor, whole and complete. That shift disrupts the emotional leverage she once held over you, not out of malice, but because you simply stopped giving it away. And whether she ever acknowledges it or not, that is the moment her respect for you begins to regenerate. Because on a deep, instinctual level, every emotionally mature woman understands this. A man who cannot hold his own emotional frame is not a man she can trust with hers. Now, does every woman respond to this shift by coming back? No, some remain silent, some move on, but all of them feel it. It is impossible not to. Energy is palpable, even across a distance. When a man withdraws, not in bitterness, but in balanced self-possession, that energy travels. It registers in her awareness. It sits with her in her moments of solitude. It colors her memory of you not as the man who begged, but as the man who rebuilt. She begins to look back, not at what you said, but at how you didn't need to say anything to make her feel something real. In your absence, you have become more present than ever. Your evolution has become louder than your affection ever was. You didn't just go silent. You became a scarce resource in a world that expected your emotional availability on demand. And scarcity creates value. She now sees what she once overlooked. She realizes what your presence used to provide and what her emotional distance took for granted. This is the shift that turns the tables not as an act of revenge, but as an act of realignment. Not because you needed her to chase you, but because you finally stopped chasing what did not value you. And in that shift, you didn't disappear, you didn't lose, you didn't shrink, you evolved. And she felt every single bit of it quietly, undeniably, deeply. You didn't text her, you didn't plead, you didn't panic. You worked, you built. You waited not for her, but for the man inside of you to rise. You became the version of yourself she never saw coming. The one who didn't argue, the one who didn't beg, the one who calmly stepped away and, in doing so, stepped directly into his own greatness. This was never about getting her back. This is about never again needing her to feel whole. She walked away from a man she thought she knew. She remembers the man she underestimated. And now, she sees the man you have become, and she knows, with absolute certainty, that she no longer controls the outcome. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, then support this channel. Your support helps us deliver these critical insights to every man who has endured a silent heartbreak and never knew how to find his way back. We are building a space where clarity replaces confusion, where strength supplants neediness, and where men rediscover the truth of who they are, one video at a time. So, like, subscribe, and share this with a brother who needs to hear it, because someone out there is still waiting by the phone when he should be stepping into his power. And if you made it to the very end of this video, drop the word unstoppable in the comments below. That's how I'll know you're truly ready.